days that define your story beyond your life. Like the day they arrived.
Signs of what might be called first contact. The objects measure at least.
I'm Colonel G.T. Weber from Army Intelligence. Pack your bags. You're at the top of everyone's list when it comes to translations. Priority 1. What do they want? Where are they from? You'll be reporting to me, but you'll be working with him when you're in the show.
That's what they call in the UFO.
Scott, have you seen Arrival?
I have seen Arrival. I've read the novella, The Story of Your Life, by Ted Chiang as well. And it's probably my favorite science fiction film of the century so far.
Well, we're on the same page there. I'd say it's mine too, probably. And I like it because I think it's the best portrayal of aliens and of alien intelligence maybe ever in a movie, but certainly since the very subtle but really interesting portrayal of alien intelligence in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And
I would agree. And I think that the strength of it for me is the fact that unlike most Hollywood films, it really gives you an intelligent look at this like the way that the literature does. Here, the aliens are, they're alien. They're truly alien. They're not humans. They're not like humans. And the fact that the film focuses in on language is just brilliant.
Who's the lead character? A college professor who's a linguist. Who they bring in, Amy Adams, they bring her in to figure out the alien language. How do you communicate with these aliens? And then, of course, it becomes about much more than language. It becomes about time travel and perceptions of reality and physics experienced in a different way. It's aliens well beyond human capability, and there is more of that. It's part of why we're doing this show on our favorite sci-fi of the 21st century, because I think they have, as time has gone by, it's not like the classic sci-fi so much that's, action and monsters, but now there's more, maybe much more influence from the literature, from writers like Philip K. Dick, who's had several movies made, several of his short stories or novels made into movies, and he was the master of writing about alternate realities, and a lot of directors are. There's a number of movies on our list that are those kind of subtle stories.
And then, of course, there's also the epic adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune novel.
Before we talk about Dune and kind of go through our list that you and I have looked together, and we have a lot of the same favorite movies, we should talk a little bit about 2001: A Space Odyssey. When we did our classic sci-fi episode, we ended with 2001, and we just sort of said it changed everything. That when that movie came, it sort of said this whole era of sci-fi films is over, and ever since then, it's been the most influential science fiction movie ever made, really, in terms of what's come in the 50 years since.
Definitely. And I think one of the strengths for 2001 is that it was made during the time when we were going to the moon, when the general public could watch news footage and see what it was like to walk in space, or what it was like for spacecraft to be out there. And the fact that every time that people are in space, or every time you see an exterior of the spaceship, it's silent. It's following the actual laws of science.
Yeah, so that was one major thing it did. It said no more of this goofy, zap guns and goofy-looking aliens and space travel that seems to happen instantaneously. 2001 was very realistic. No sound in space. It was the first movie that I know of to do that, because there's no air in space, there's no sound in deep space, and also showing that the astronauts who are out there were basically bored. It's this months-long ride to Jupiter, and there's not much to do. It's kind of mundane. But he lulls you in with this mundane stuff in the movie, because I won't be giving away much, because even if people haven't seen it, it's such a complex movie, and you have to see it a couple times. It ultimately is about really the way the human race came about, and millions of years on Earth. And then this we never see the aliens in that movie, but there's this obvious, incredibly high intelligence behind everything.
And also, mentioning Arrival, this is the precursor to that in terms of presenting aliens as truly alien. as unlike humanity and beyond the way that the human mind cannot encompass them in a way.
Yeah, they look completely. They look a little bit like octopuses or something, but beyond
That's
that,
in Arrival, but in 2001 we don't see them at all.
we don't see them at all. But in Arrival, they look really weird. They have to be behind a kind of force field because they obviously don't breathe the same atmosphere or whatever, and you can't communicate with them at all in the beginning. And then the communication itself becomes the key to the movie and kind of a key to alternate physics and alternate perception of time, and make it just a fascinating movie where we all kind of think that. We think, well, if there is intelligence that's out there that's beyond ours, they would be living by kind of different rules and laws, even laws of physics. And that, in this movie, that's what it is. Well, let's go through our list. I have a list written in reverse order, starting with the most recent. And interestingly, on my list going from 2022, I only have one on 2021, all the way back to the turn of the century, the first three most recent, are all by the same director, the French-Canadian director Denis Villeneuve. And I would argue he's the greatest director right now working of science fiction, because he made Dune, which people have different views, but I think it's masterful. I think it's a great movie, and in some ways even improves on the book, which is widely regarded by many people as the greatest science fiction novel. He did Blade Runner 2049, which was sort of, a job for hire. Obviously, they needed someone to do the sequel, but this is one of those really good sequels that goes its own route. Blade Runner 2049 is just not some like lesser version of the original Blade Runner from the 80s. And Harrison Ford is in it. Ryan Gosling and Ana de Armas are the co-stars, but it's terrific. And then there's Arrival. So just on the strength of those three, it's pretty amazing. The only other, I was trying to think what other director has done a bunch of sci-fi in the 21st century. And guess who? Steven Spielberg, the guy who did Close Encounters in E.T. has done, I noted 4 sci-fi films that he's done. 2 of them are kind of forgettable, War of the Worlds, a remake of War of the Worlds, and Ready Player One.
Which was the most recent one.
The most recent. That's a young adult novel. Those are both okay. But the ones that I think are really good are AI, Artificial Intelligence, which is a fantastic exploration right at the turn of the century.
Which was actually a Stanley Kubrick idea that who made 2001 that Spielberg took on.
Yeah, and that's one of those ironies, because you could argue that Steven Spielberg is one of the most sentimental, romantic filmmakers ever. And Spielberg was totally unsentimental.
You mean Kubrick?
Stanley Kubrick was unsentimental. But
he was almost cold in a way.
He was. And this was near the end of his life, and he couldn't get the robot right, and he gave the project to Spielberg. It's one more evidence of Kubrick's brilliance. Because people who love Kubrick would say, oh, he's not a jerk like Spielberg. He doesn't make these romantic movies with John Williams, emotional scores throughout them. He tells a real story. And it turns out, no, they were actually friends. And he respected what Spielberg could do. And he thought Spielberg could make this movie better than I could. And it came out pretty good, I think.
It did. And in fact, one of the things that's I think is brilliant about the movie, and this is not a big spoiler because it's a big sprawling movie with a lot of different things, but by the end of it, the aliens are actually the humanity.
Mostly it's a near future story of a family that doesn't have a child, or they've lost their child, and they get a robotic child who is indistinguishable from, they're so perfect, they seem like humans. And it brings up this wonderful question about what is the nature of a human being? Because this kid is, the robot is programmed just to love these parents, the mother, unconditionally. And what do we owe that being, who's intelligent and learns and but then it towards the end, without giving, this won't give away anything, you have to watch the movie, but it jumps like 2,000 years in time. And people argue about that ending as to whether those beings are aliens or future highly intelligent robots. Leave it to the viewer to decide. But anyway, going back before the wonderful 3 Denis Villeneuve movies, my next one going backwards in time is 2015, Mad Max Fury Road.
George Miller returning to the Mad Max universe and doing it in a way that was critically acclaimed.
To me, it's the greatest action movie ever made. It just, it's just it's nonstop, amazing action the whole time, but also a very compelling, interesting science fiction story in there.
And, at a time when there's all sorts of TV shows on that you could see that are post-apocalyptic and carrying on in some ways the tradition of the original Mad Max, and then Miller just comes in and says, this is the way you do it.
Yeah, because it's fun in a way. You can enjoy it. It's not like totally depressing dystopian future, right? It's invigorating to watch this action, and yet it does have a very strong story.
And then Her is one that I have not seen, directed by Spike Jonze. And it's another one about, isn't it, just having remembered the previews, it's about what is human, is an artificial intelligence, is that something that a human can make a connection with? Right.
It's very much about that. It's a romance. Joaquin Phoenix is the lead, and Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with his AI, kind of a Siri-like thing. You never see Her, the title of the movie, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, but in every way it seems like a real bond, like a relationship, and he takes her to be utterly human. But of course she's not. So that's another very interesting, and that one is one of those many science fiction movies that feels like this could happen. How far are we going to go with artificial intelligence?
And given how not artificial intelligence, but how algorithms on computers and on the internet are affecting people's behavior.
Yeah. And
then in 2010, you have Inception, Christopher Nolan. It's considered a masterpiece of science fiction. You've been aware of this film since 2010. I just watched it, and it's an amazing film. It's an absolutely incredible, and it's very Philip K. Dickian, even though it's not based on a Philip K. Dick book or story.
Yeah, Dick was the master of he sets up one level of reality, and then there's sort of like another level or a reality within that reality. And of course, Inception is about these artificially created dreams. They're sort of engineered. They're not true dream, but they're to get inside a person's mind to be able to get them to get information from them or to get them to do something. And, the movie ends up being about dream within a dream within a dream. There's multiple levels.